Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk About. And today we're talking about cost management, or obviously trying to reduce costs. And we've got Steve Mead here from Sancus Limited. Steve, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Morning.
Steve, let's just jump straight in about cost management. We'll get to about what you do about it later on. But what is cost management? I mean, is it just about finding the cheapest supplier?
It's anything but, actually. Proper cost management isn't about chasing the very cheapest cost for your business, reducing the cost. It's all about investing time. It's all about knowledge of the industry and about expertise in the cost category you're actually looking at, to ensure your business benefits from the very best service at the most cost-effective price. If I just give you a quick example, actually, just to bring that to life, we had a dental client with about 5 practices in South London, and they approached me a couple of years ago now. They had 5 receptionists. They had 5 different telephone internet providers. Now, he initially approached saying, I need to get these costs right down. Most people would just go straight to the relevant supplier and ask for lower bills, basically. But what we did was to look at this as being an example of an opportunity to actually look at the way the practice worked. So to cut a long story short, we introduced one new provider across all 5 practices, which gave the dental practice an opportunity to reduce the number of receptionists, put that headcount into other areas of the business, which enabled them to improve their customer service. So we reduced their costs, yes, but we also improved the efficiency of the business. That's cost management.
So it's not just about looking for someone who's cheaper, because we'll get onto this in a minute. But sometimes the people that phone you up and tell you their services are cheaper, it's not entirely true. And it's not also just about going to your current provider and just trying to squeeze more discount out of them. It's actually about looking at why you're having those costs and actually addressing that.
Absolutely. Well, it's the first most important thing is to understand, do you have the right supplier providing the right solution for your business? And once you understand that, you need to benchmark that solution against the market, against the industry. I would say most businesses fall into the trap of assuming if they stay with a supplier long enough, they'll enjoy loyalty discounts. And yes, of course, suppliers are only too happy to discount by 5-10% if they're pressed to do so. But that's 5-10% off an already high base. So the supplier is covered because they know that they're overcharging the customer in the first place.
So then why get someone external to do this? I mean, surely if you've got some staff members floating about, or I mean, one of the other videos you've done, we've spoken to an accountant, and the accountant addressed the fact that they do look at some of the costs, but they're not looking in as much detail as you would. But I mean, why get someone external to actually do this?
I think the most important thing, when I mentioned earlier, there's 3 parts to cost management, and one of the most important ones is time. We target small, medium enterprises with staff up to, say, 30, 40 people. Now, for any SME in this market, today's world has to innovate, has to stay ahead of competitors. To do that, they've got to constantly be looking at their client and meeting their client's needs. The last thing they should be doing, arguably, is spending time managing their internal costs. In addition to that, the individuals that have the responsibility to look at these costs invariably have 101 other things to be doing as well. So they would rather reduce the time they're spending on cost management and actually assume their current supplier is going to deliver them with the best package. They don't have the expertise of a particular category. They don't have the time to actually make sure they get the best value. And that's where Sancus comes in. We have the time, we have the expertise, and we have the knowledge of the categories and all the suppliers out there to actually find that client the right deal.
Because I think that's one of the misconceptions about cost management, is people just assume that you've got a supplier that, you know, is giving you kickbacks or something, and whenever someone comes to you, you just send them. But you don't have a go-to supplier, do you? You're obviously looking at the entire market.
Absolutely, anything but. Where Sanka's completely independent, and that's critical to all of this, because we spend time analysing a client's needs, and we match that with one of the hundreds of suppliers out there that we know will deliver the best value for that particular client. We will not put a client with a particular supplier if we don't think it's the best long-term solution for them.
Now, at what point, I mean, obviously I've got my own business, it's a very small business. It's pointless me coming to you so that you can save me 12p a year on my mobile phone contract.
Yep.
At what point does it become viable? I mean, what size does a business need to be before you would consider getting involved with them?
Well, Sankas is named after the Greek god of trust, would you believe? So we're all about building trust and long-term relationships. We don't have a minimum or maximum client size that we stick to. We'll help anyone that needs the help. Our sweet spot, our area that we like to get involved because we have the biggest impact on that client is obviously SMEs, but up to about £90 million turnover. Going down to ideally £100,000 turnover. But as I said, we'll work with anyone, and we have clients from 1 to 2 man bands all the way up to an operation of about 50 headcount.
Okay. So now, is this sole cost management thing just a once-off thing, or is it an ongoing thing? And how often should people review their costs, or should people get their costs reviewed, if that's a better question?
Good question. I personally believe if a business has got the time, invariably they don't, that's where we come in, we should be looking at costs every 6 months and making sure that the supplier is delivering what they said they're delivering. You'll be amazed how many invoices we see where and match them against the original agreement, and we're seeing that actually the supplier isn't delivering what they initially agreed to in the first place. And we look to then work with them on an annual basis, reviewing all the costs as and when their contracts come to an end for forever, essentially. There's never a time where our services come to an end. Each year, there'll always be some new cost, some new hurdle the business has to overcome in order to reduce the costs of the business.
All right, now we'll get to the tricky question, Steve. So this one hopefully won't put you on the spot. But something that often, as someone who looks at the costs and looks at spending money and wants to spend money wisely and looks at return on investment, how does one know that using your services will actually save them money?
That's not tricky. That's easier than you might think to answer, actually. To all intents and purposes, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about, yes, reducing costs, but also about efficiencies of the business. I go back to that practice that we introduced a new telecom and internet system, the 5 practices. They were able to do the black and white comparison. This is what an internet service cost us before Sankas came in. This is what the internet service costs us now. And that resulted in about a 9% discount. Cheaper invoice, yeah, absolutely. So that's the fact. But then, of course, overlaying that is the slightly more grayer area with the business efficiencies we brought in. And that's less tangible, but no less equally important. And that's the area where we increased efficiencies within the business. So instead of having 5 receptionists, there were 5 extra people that were able to contribute to client or patient satisfaction by not just sitting behind the desk answering the telephones when they came in. The telephones were call diverted to one receptionist who was able to place the call at the appropriate practice. So there you've got black and white tangible evidence of reductions in their costs, and then you overlay that with the efficiencies which we can't identify quite as tangibly as the pounds and pennies, but nevertheless there's still savings that were made there.
All right. Now we get onto the bit that you and I have in common, and the bit where we've obviously discussed and where we've worked together before, and that comes down to data analysis.
Yes.
You can't really do any of this without analyzing the data first, can you?
We can't do any cost management unless we have evidence of how the company is spending. It would be reckless to do any recommendations or make any recommendations unless we know the current expenditure pattern. And for that, we need whatever data the customer is able to provide, be it your invoices, contracts. In the case of energy, for instance, and this is where we first met, the energy throughput in terms of how a company's using their energy. Our role isn't just about supplying the right supplier to deliver the service. It's all about understanding how a customer spends their cash.
Because, I mean, let's just look at the energy for a minute, because the energy I find quite fascinating. Growing up in South Africa, you had one energy supplier, that was the government. If you wanted energy, you paid their money. If you didn't want energy, you didn't pay the money.
Yes.
Just before I actually immigrated, they increased their prices by over 100%. And they just said, well, we need more money. You pay it or don't.
Right.
And when I arrived in the UK and you asked kind of which energy supplier would you like, I said, what do you mean, which energy supplier? I just want energy. And it took me a while to figure out how they worked. And I don't want to say it's a massive con, but it is a massive con, because when you go to these price comparison websites and they say we're going to save you £240 a year, what they mean is you were paying that much. At the end of your contract, you now have to pay that much. And off of that, we're going to save you £240. But if you look at what you were paying compared to what you're now paying, you're actually paying more, but they've disguised it as a sale by saying you would have paid even more had you not renewed your contract. Now, although technically that's true, I find that very misleading. And so I've already created a spreadsheet in order to actually monitor what I'm actually using compared to the new rate. And then you look at base rates and rates, you know, per unit of energy or for gas. And then all of a sudden it depends on your usage as to which one would be a better. You can't just look at two energy quotes and go, that one's cheaper, because you have to base it on your actual usage. Absolutely. Now you take your business into consideration, and you've got different times at different rates, and when you're working and when you're not working. I mean, you can't have a conversation on the phone with someone and say, oh, you're charging £12, they're charging 10, they're cheaper, because that's not the case. There's so much more involved.
Absolutely.
And unless you're actually sitting down, analyzing that, looking at the times when you're working, changing your production times if need be, or whatever, and actually analyzing all of that data, you can't possibly make the right call. And the person on the other end of the phone can't possibly tell you that they're cheaper.
No,
because they just don't know.
Absolutely. And you struck on an issue, actually. The energy market is quite a complex one. In particular, the electricity market. Gas is more straightforward. You can store gas, and there lies the issue with the energy market. Electricity suppliers have to forward buy their electricity, and obviously the electricity can't be stored anywhere, although the industry is looking at giant battery storage areas now. But at the moment, it's very volatile, and therefore suppliers have to build into that a safety margin, I suppose. And sometimes it works for the client, sometimes it doesn't. But the key thing, and you touched on it earlier, the most important thing for a supplier, for a customer to understand is how they use their energy. And that's where we can come in then. As you said earlier, as long as you know how they're using their energy on a half-hourly basis, it's more likely you'll be able to find a supplier that can deliver that electricity at the right time for the right price. However, that's sort of a depth of knowledge that most customers don't have, neither have the time or the inclination to want to look further. So they rely and assume that their supplier will look after them. And that, unfortunately, is, dare I say, a bit naive, because as we know, most energy companies are really in it for their own.
Well, I mean, I discovered that quite quickly when someone phoned me up saying, yeah, we're going to save you so much on your energy. And then our monthly payments amount came down, but then after 6 months you get this letter saying, oh no, you're way behind payment, we need to up your payments to accommodate. And you kind of go, but hold on, you told me it was going to come down. And that's when I started to investigate. And I mean, this is just one aspect of cost management. If you look at all the other aspects, I mean, take energy, for example, just because the numbers appear to be cheaper doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cost you less. Sometimes staying with the same provider but switching around your manufacturing hours might save you a lot more money than actually switching.
Absolutely.
But it all depends on looking at the data and understanding it.
It does. You have to look at that granular data in order to build a more accurate picture of demand. Now, not every business uses half-hourly meters, of course, and that's a different scenario where they just have an annual consumption, and they are tendered differently because the prices are structured differently for customers. So not all sort of the clients that we work with use half-hourly data, but things like dry cleaners, etc., use or have a very high consumption of electricity. And like with most SMEs, don't have the time to shop around. And even if they do shop around using the simple annual consumption, they restrict themselves to the headline suppliers, the EDFs, the Eons of this world, because they're not aware of the plethora of suppliers behind the scenes. And that's the ones that we can tap into to be able to deliver a cheaper supply of electricity, and do that on an annual basis, not just assume that the supplier they've shown loyalty to will continue to deliver the very best prices, especially at the moment. I mean, today we've probably all heard due to the coronavirus, but the knock-on effect of the oil prices being reduced, that will have a massive impact on energy prices for the foreseeable future. Whereas most suppliers, the big headline suppliers, may decide to bank that and continue to offer the prices that they are today.
And sometimes there's an overlap between services, isn't there? I mean, if you think about even just the home, if you decide to, for argument's sake, not have a landline and to use a VoIP phone or something like that, then all of a sudden it's using your internet. So now, do you have unlimited internet, or are you paying for a set number of gigabytes, whatever it might be, of internet? So you have to take all of those into consideration. Just because they might say, well, we're cheaper because we don't use lines, we use internet, or whatever the case might be. But then you need to look at your internet costs and go, how does that compare? I mean, I just think about mobile phone. Every time you come to renewing your mobile phone contract, you got all these different packages with different phones offering you at different prices, and you need to go and sit and weigh up the pros and cons of each of them.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I sometimes hear from people who have got similar contracts to mine who are paying more than twice as much as what I'm paying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they, because they just go and go, oh, what's the next phone? Let's just upgrade.
Yep.
And that doesn't always work. And I can imagine when you've got a mobile phone and you're paying, I don't know, between 15 and 30 pounds a month, it's not the end of the world. But at some business costs are extremely high, and you have to know what you're doing.
Yes. But again, it comes down to understanding how a business uses their mobile phones or uses their internet. We're seeing a seismic shift of clients moving from your standard copper line, BDST, to VoIP. However, the bigger suppliers are perhaps maximizing the opportunities they have, because most smaller clients don't understand the benefits of what VoIP has over the traditional copper line, and therefore they're buying more packages on that than they actually need. And again, you come back to this analysis where we understand, you have to understand what a client needs in order to deliver the very best package. We certainly wouldn't want to go in and over-promise on a particular package and find the client's hardly using everything that the internet service can provide. And that's the thing, I think, even in your domestic, you mentioned the mobile phone, you have to understand what you're going to need, how, if you're going to text more, if you're going to chat more or use more streaming services. And there's no point in looking for a cheap package until you know exactly how you intend to use the phone.
I mean, look at website bandwidth. When I first started the business, you went to a website host and they had unlimited bandwidth that you then discover actually isn't unlimited bandwidth.
Yeah.
The way that they work it, they're saying they're giving you unlimited, but actually their servers can't necessarily handle it if we all used it. But then I discovered actually by switching hosts, I went to someone who charged for the bandwidth, but they offer their bandwidth in what they call slices. So you can buy the bandwidth in slices.
Yes.
So because I realized I wasn't using anywhere near what I could have been using, I now buy what I need, and it costs me a fraction of the price of what it did beforehand when I had unlimited. And you just can't, and you know, just understanding those kind of things, because at the end of the day, as you say, unlimited sounds great, but do you actually need it? And in some cases, you don't.
But also the other thing to bear in mind, unlimited, if you often find there's an asterisk by the side of that marketing hype, to find that unlimited isn't guaranteed anyway, and is dependent on a number of things, not excluding the contention rate, where if everyone upstream is suddenly downloading, then there's no way you'll get the sort of speed of internet that most businesses require. I've got a good example there, actually, of one distribution company that we did some work for, who desperately needed a better internet service. So this is another example that, from a cost management side, we came in not to reduce his costs as an objective, but to actually improve his internet connectivity. He had an internet speed of something like 5 megabytes per second, which in this day and age is frankly appalling for a business. They were on an industrial park. And unfortunately, all the bigger businesses were feeding off the same internet connection, and therefore, at certain times of the day, the download speed disappeared because everyone was using it. The pipe is only so full. So after reviewing that scenario and looking at his options, we installed a lease line for him, which effectively, a lease line is a dedicated line for that customer only. So he won't get any degradation of his service because he's the only one using it. And when we then step back, not only did he have an improvement in his internet speed and all the positive knock-on effects that has on his business, he also had comparable costs. So a good example that you need to understand a business before you can make any changes.
Now, Steve, if a business gets in touch with you, what would you offer them short-term and long-term?
Okay. I mean, short-term is really the simple answer there is reduce your costs. I think that's the best analogy there. It's just we come in and we can offer them, dependent on their current situation, across the board. And when I say costs, I mean, for a business, we're looking at anything from your energy, we've mentioned that, but your merchant cards, insurance. We're looking at things like even business rates, for instance. There's been lots of negative news about business rates and the adverse impact business rates can have on bricks and mortar retailers and businesses. We have a process where we can go through and get that reduced if there's an opportunity for it. So things like the business rates, they're your short term, but long term really is the assurance for the or assurance stroke peace of mind that our clients have someone behind the scenes who will be monitoring their costs on a 6-monthly basis for as long as the client wants that partnership for. So they know that they can release their people that would have normally been doing this monitoring off and focus on their client needs. And that's on the long term. So Sankus really is a long-term partnership with our clients.
All right, but now why is Sankus different to others? I mean, we all get these, we touched on this earlier, actually, we all get these people phoning us, telling us that they can get us cheaper rates.
Yeah.
And whenever we submit the books, the accountant will come along and say, listen, let's lower these costs, let's lower those costs. And, you know, you phone 2 or 3 suppliers and one seems a lot cheaper. So you go, oh yeah, we're going to save some money. I
Yes.
mean, I know we've spoken about this already, but just recap for us. Why are you different to them?
Okay. I think the first thing to say is we're independent. So we will go to any supplier that we believe offers the best, most cost-effective package for the customer. Two, we're in it for the long term. So we're not just going to secure the cheapest possible deal for a client, knowing that in the following year his costs may increase. We're there to ensure that that value for money is maintained year in, year out. And three, we only focus on cost management and business efficiency. So therefore, we will continually use our expert knowledge of the marketplace to build relationships with suppliers out there. And when we have that sort of relationship, we're more likely to have those sort of deals, stroke packages, not available to the customer out there in the wider world. So that's why I think we're different, because we're looking at it in the long term. We're not just going to compare against the cheapest supplier. We want to make sure that that new supplier is able to deliver year in, year out.
So what we basically understood is that cost management is not just about looking for the cheapest. It's about analyzing your data, understanding your usage, finding the right package that actually applies to your current usage. Or your projected usage, at least if that's what you're looking forward to, and actually fully understanding that. And that, I mean, I know I do quite a few spreadsheets that do data analysis, and it takes time. It's not a quick fix. And actually, then therefore having someone like yourself in the background who's working along to maintain that and to understand that on an ongoing basis, to bring about the right change. And I would imagine, I mean, we've spoken about 1 or 2 things like energy or phones or whatever the case might be, but when you apply that concept and that understanding over your entire business, it could end up saving you a small fortune, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And again, let me bring that to life very briefly. Merchant cards. I mean, we all know the big providers out there, such as WorldPay, Payment Sense. Every business knows those. They've got salesmen everywhere. And most businesses are with one or both of these operations. However, there's a load of other suppliers behind the scenes that most businesses won't get to hear of that can provide a service as good as, if not better than, those main providers. We had a garage, a car mechanic garage, who had been in the business for about 38 years, and they thought they were getting a very good deal from their current supplier. So all they did each year was challenge the rates that the supplier was offering and negotiate, in inverts, a couple of % discount. They were happy because they thought that they were being looked after. We came in and we took their analysis of spend by card type over a period of about 6 months. And as you probably appreciate with the garage, it can be very erratic use of spends. The average purchase price was about £350 odd for a service for a car. But the card types vary. Some use Visa, some use Switch, etc. This is customers. So we took all that data and we went out to the wider market, and we were able to reduce their fees, the garage, by a whopping 68%. 68% over the course of a year for this garage meant about an £18,000 saving on card fees. Now, his first words were, we thought we were being looked after by this supplier. And they were, if you weren't and didn't have a benchmark for how else you could be spending your money. So that's the sort of thing that we'll be doing. And the following year, we'll go back to the supplier and we'll use his fees as a benchmark again to make sure that he's maintaining those good prices. And that's the beauty of sort of the Sancus. We have that knowledge and expertise of the wider market and know where else to go to find the best service.
All right, well, Steve, I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, it's interesting. I hope some people have learned some things, that it's not just about looking at the numbers when people call you. There's a lot more to it than that. And hopefully people have got a better understanding of cost management.
Absolutely. Yes. No, thank you very much, Richard. It's been a pleasure.